Okay, this hour we are joined by Billy Tuggle, who is a performance poet, spoken word artist, slam poet, kind of Chicago legend. Toured the country. I'm really, really, really excited. Talk to him about his career and his path and the different things that he's been involved with over the years. Get a real insight into Chicago poetry and so many other so much other poetry from from the time he's been doing it. So Billy, can you tell us how you got into doing performance poetry, spoken word?
Slid into it early on in the slam movement in the early to mid '90s. I kind of happened to cross it, um, weirdly enough, watching MTV and seeing slam poets and spoken word artists featured, and then all of a sudden they were featured as one of the side stages at Lollapalooza back when it was a big traveling festival. And I took a liking to it. I had notebooks full of all kinds of ranty, nerdy, pseudo political cultural weirdness and no band to scream it with. So I started going to poetry open mics and then started finding different ways to apply art, apply kind of hip hop mentality, kind of being a Chicago kid, a South Sider, and like that, being on the periphery of a lot of different arts, but on kind of on the ground level of some new art and craft.
Yeah. So you mentioned before we started this conversation in the green room, so to speak. You mentioned that you had been in bands and been performing with as a frontman. So can you tell us a little about like what was your sound like? What was that like?
We started off like in my mid to late teens. I'm a '70s baby, '80s kid. We started off kind of like very soul funk heavy rock leaning Prince cover band. Actually started out in the garage in the attic, Prince cover band, but kind of really morphing into more like Fishbone, Living Color, 24/7 Spies, Bad Brain, stuff that we were listening to at the time, especially things that were kind of bubbling under like Fishbone and Living Color.
Yeah.
um, kind of they were getting signed right around that time, and so we kind of felt like, oh, and all black kids from the South Side and of Chicago, Northwest Indiana, and it kind of felt like finally we were gonna get a look, and so we kind of slagged away at it for a couple of years, and a few people lost motivation.
Mm. So what venues were you playing at the time?
uh, Basements and garages. We never got out of the house. A couple of skating parties, like literally at skate rinks, birthday parties, things like that. But I think a sum total of three gigs, including a Halloween party and a couple of skate parties, and that was it. We developed a handful of songs. We developed a handful of covers. We could have played pretty much anywhere, but like I said, it was a severe lack of motivation. College age kids trying to go to school and work, and you all of a sudden you have a little bit of talent and you've a little bit of fear of success. Some kids stay with it, some don't.
Yeah. Well,
So
I'm kind of interested in obviously it didn't work out that way, but your life went a different direction. But I am interested in this idea of a punk rock scene on the South Side of Chicago, because most people don't think about that kind of thing, right? And like right now there's a renaissance and interest in the East LA punk scene, right? For instance, there's
yeah.
articles every few months about that. Um, but tell us about that, because this is the first I was there a
Well,
scene?
see, this is kind of where we were making a foray. It wasn't even so much the punk rock scene in and around Chicago, though we went to parties at it. I went to high school at Kenwood Academy near Hyde Park. So we ended up at a lot of University of Chicago parties, lab school, kids like that. But a lot of us, like the black kids, we were the infiltrators. And it's also kind of how I motivated myself to get into slam, because at slam in Chicago at the time it was starting, it was multicultural, but still had a very, north side, not black, not necessarily brown people lean to it. So for me to be messing around with music, it was because I had I was in, different school programs here and there, either in high school or extracurricular, and goofed around with it. But I was never fully a part of a scene. What ended up happening was we would end up clubs like Thirsty Whale in the burbs, and it may have been a black white thing at the time, too young to really to get young and naive to really know, but it was mainly metal and not really any hybrid like type of shit that we were trying to do. But Medusa's, which was a dance club, we got kind of a second look, and Dave, R.I.P. He listened to the tape that we had, and he wanted to hear a second one, but we never pulled the gig, and it was never really part of any specific scene. It was spots that were alternative to us, but everything is alternative to black kids. It was spots that we knew that our friends or our friends' friends had played, or we had gone to for shows or for dances. Um, Clubs that were kind of turning over from house music clubs that had kind of changed memberships, uh, that were uh, I'm trying to think, like, not the Bismarck but La Mirage. I think that became epitome. Well, there would be people who would come in for like a month, or 4 or 5 months, and might have the tail end of a lease and end up throwing a party, and so we would adjust our set to whatever it was. But it was real fly by night. It was very insular, and it ended up being, when what ended up being the literal handful of gigs that we played were word of mouth, friends of friends, and not getting out of our own attic and basement or garage to really try and do, and technical, and really try and do anything with any success. The motivation was there to be an artist and performer, and I think that's definitely what carried me into performance poetry.
Yeah. Okay. So the band breaks up. You're kind of just kind of like you still got your artistic drive. You discover this thing, spoken word. It's starting to explode. You're right there. You're in Chicago. Where does slam enter the picture? Because slam is not spoken word. For those who watch, because a wide array of people will see this at some point. So slam is not exactly spoken word. So when does the competition of slam enter into your
Um,
life?
Maybe about a year or two after, about maybe 3 years after my last band experience, when I had moved out of my parents' house, I ended up living 3 blocks from the Green Mill. Now, I worked on the north side of Chicago at Tower Records, and one of my coworkers, Bruce Tate, he's a singer songwriter and also a poet, and he had been going to the mill off and on. This was in the age of like Sin Salach and Patricia Smith and uh, Reggie Gibson and such. He had been going to the mill off and on, and he enjoyed the slam, and he talked me into going with, especially because I lived in the neighborhood. And I had gone to several open mics before that: Lit X in Wicker Park, Full Moon Madness, which moved around the South Side and which happened every full moon, so it happened about 13 times a year.
Cool.
A couple other random places where the scene was kind of starting to bubble, but also the slam had been at Green Mill at this point for about 10 years, the Uptown Poetry Slam. And so it had been kind of known, and people would go, and it was kind of there for the show, and sometimes it was taken seriously, and it was taken as seriously as the poet could make the audience take it. There was an open mic portion, and the feature poets that, traveling either locally or traveling, was always great. But the slam was there, and it was interesting, and it was an interesting game. But also, I didn't realize until much later that it's designed really just to get people to pay closer attention to what's going on the stage. um, so really, before enjoying applying what I did to the game itself, I kind of sat back and watched for a couple years, and it was vaguely interesting. But it really didn't move me until I saw my first national competition in '99, when I saw a lot of different styles of performance poets applying their work to slam, and also hearing a few recordings, and seeing a few poets, um, seeing and hearing a few poets perform their work in avenues that I had not fully considered, since playing in funk rock bands, but also a hip hop kid and like as a fan of MCs, but also as a former breaker and as a graffiti writer, part of the culture as a whole, hearing Ursula Rucker on the Roots or Jessica Care Moore on Nas's records, Saul Williams and like that, I knew that I could do this and put it in other places. The slam turned out to be an interesting looking lab to try out this kind of the shorter forms of things that I wanted to do. So I kind of looked at melding the two together. And this was like probably around 99, 2000 when I heard Amethyst Rockstar, but also when I saw my first national slam competition.
Yeah. So you saw the slam. Obviously, was that as a participant, or was that like just as a observer, or?
As an observer, that was actually 98, 99 was when Mental Graffiti got started in Chicago. It got started in response to uh, from what anecdotally, from what I understand, some problems with either the audience or the hosts of the Uptown Slam. The founder of the Uptown Poetry Slam is the guy who started the game, Mark Smith. Apparently, Crystal Ash had an issue with some things that happened, and some other poets, Maria McCrae, R.I.P., uh, Tara Betts, Reggie Gibson. Um, there a lot they had some issues, and so they started their own slam. And so it was called Mental Graffiti, and Mental Graffiti wanted to put a team in the 99 Nationals, which was in Chicago. And at the time I didn't even, I wasn't part of the scene deep enough to know that there was a competition that was outside of a couple of bars or cafes. um, I heard about it. I went to the hip hop open mic that was attached to it, and then I saw a couple of the competitive bouts. But I did get to see uh, several teams of poets from outside of Chicago applying their art and craft to this 3 minute competitive format.
Yeah. So mental graffiti. Can you tell us a little bit more about starting in response to Green Mill and to people booing and hissing or whatever the hell they do at the Green Mill. I've been there a couple times. And so you start mental graffiti up. Can you tell us what was the venue like? What was it like to be in the milieu of it getting started?
I wasn't there at the very, very beginnings. I believe it started as a writers group in late 97, early 98. I had been going to a couple other open mics in the area, one at a bookstore called Lit X, Literary Explosions, that was run by Mario Smith. And there was another one, a DJ friend of mine, Jeff Alvarez, in his loft space. Uh, some other DJ and writer friends of mine were regulars there. So on Milwaukee Avenue in Wicker Park. And I met Anacron, who was the co-host and DJ for Mental Graffiti, and he was, you know, had been mentioning it come out. It was weekly on Monday nights at an old at a place called the Mad Bar. The building still exists. It exists as another bar now. I don't even think the bar that replaced it is still there. But at the time, the neighborhood was turning over and becoming a lot more of an artist haunt, which at the time was a lot of fun. But when you look back in history of things, that's generally the first wave of gentrification. Is
Yeah.
the hipsters follow the artists, and then the yuppies follow the hipsters. But we were the artists, and then the hipsters back when before it was a bad word in the late '90s. Um, but I found out about mental graffiti in like 90, probably 98, 90, like early 90, like late 98, early 99. And I started hanging out and going regularly. And I found out, that it was connected to this national event. And just becoming a regular with, and becoming comfortable, not really with just the slam, or but really the people that populated it. And it's funny because really from the beginning, it's had a very different atmosphere from the Uptown Poetry Slam. That even through the years, it has been said by some of the performers that have attended Mental Graffiti that Mental Graffiti is the Chicago Slam where the poets go to hear the poets as opposed to the audience comes to hear the poets.
Hmm. Can you expand on that? What was meant by that?
Um, the Uptown Poetry Slam has always been about the show, for good or for bad. Not just the booing, the hissing, but even the good stuff, the hooting, the hollering.
Yeah.
Um, but it's always been very much about the show. Uh, they've put some great teams into that national competition. A couple of times I've been in the mix for competing for both of them, and a lot of my friends have been on those teams back when they were in the prime of their competition. But the audience is not always there. I mean, even as it's known for being the home of the slam or the base of slam, the audience comes. So a lot of times they're there because it's the Green Mill. They're there because they came early before the jazz set. They came because they've heard about the poetry slam and it's been there for so long that they want to know what it's about. And you do get a lot of people who've never attended any kind of poetry reading, spoken word event, performance poetry, anything. And so it's really the whole audience thing is played up. It's played up to an almost vaudevillian level, and really kind of unapologetically. A lot of people don't realize that, but the show is really part of it. Mental Graffiti, on the other hand, was a poetry reading. It's an open mic. It's fun. It was in a bar. You could have a cocktail or three if that's what you're into. But even when it came down to the slam, it was $10, $20, so it wasn't any real money, but it was there, to get people to really kind of step up the writing and performance. But it was really a lot about the writers performers. If I walk into the Uptown Poetry Slam, I could sit in a spot in one part of the room or the other with writers and poets, and the room is full of audience. At Mental Graffiti, I know everyone in the room, and it's all writer performers. That was kind of always the difference between the two shows.
Yeah. So, can you share a poem with us?
Yeah, um, I'd like to. Hold on one second. Um, um, this is relatively recent. Uh, I put out a chapbook a few years ago. I call it Incantation. Um, it looks like this. um, I did it because I was going on tour with Will Gibson, and at the time I didn't have much of anything out. I had a bunch of anthology stuff out, but I call the book Incantation because I come from a long line of spirit calling peoples, because books stay filled with ghosts, because ain't enough voodoo in the world, and from my daughter Carmody's ancestors. um, this is called Cursing. And I'm kind of inspired to read it because I saw that the San Francisco Police Department, they're all masked up because of the public health crisis, and they were all wearing thin blue line U.S. flag masks. So I was inspired to do cursing tonight. As long as you are one to ignore legislative underhand and law enforcement overreach into brown people's communities, may you have diarrhea in every traffic jam. May toilet paper always stick to your stupid ass. One mutter of not all cops, and may your ATM card malfunction with a 938 balance. May the print you read grow smaller, farther, and more faint. May you enter a poetry slam, get a time penalty, and choke on it. May you be the father, even without the balls. As long as you fix fingers to type, curl lip, and tongue to utter asinine as all lives, without termination, indictment, conviction, may your hair hurt and teeth itch, nails dissolve and taste buds erupt in boils. Upon first bite and swallow, may your coffee and muffin turn to kitchen cleanser and steel wool. May every detraction from the conversation with such mythologies as black on black crime find yourself chained to a hot rock on the slipperiest slope of an overdue volcano. May your ancestors disown you. May time travel be invented to undo you until you recognize the disproportionate number of brown lives disrupted by the violent notion that everyone of melanin is a threat, until you bring empathy and compassion and reason and construction to the discussion. I wish you spontaneous combustion, and your children, and your children's children, and your children's children's children, and your children.
Damn, man. Yeah, man. I remember one time someone pissed me off so much, I was like, man, fuck you, man. Fuck you 7 generations forward and backwards.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I know the feeling. I know the feeling. All right, so no, that's a great poem. Um,
Thank you.
so we covered that. We covered get involved in slam. Um, so you've been to how many national competitions now?
Um, just NPS. I attended every one from. I went to 99 briefly, but fully all in as a participant, either as a volunteer or as a competitor. I've attended every one from 2001 until the last one in 2018 here in Chicago.
Wow. So I have a
Yeah.
question. This maybe you can just not you can just choose not to answer it because it might be controversial. It won't get
No,
me
no,
in
no.
here. I'm totally out of it now. But do you think that the advent of YouTube and social media has, or not the advent, but the explosion of it, in all of our lives in general, right,
Mhm.
has that made it so that more slam poets sound more similar more of the time?
Yes.
Because
Yes. But also there's a second component to that.
okay,
That second component is youth slam.
okay,
I'm also a mentor. When I started taking it super seriously, and I talk about I've attended every NPS since 2001. I've also attended every Louder Than a Bomb since 2000. Youth Poetry Slam has been important as a mentorship point, as an education point, as a hip hop educator, as a teaching artist. And so, for the good or bad, I look around the scene now and I look at some of my own kids who are now 30 years old, who I've known since they were teenagers, who are brilliant orators, who are brilliant scholars, who have applied the craft of being in front of a room of people or showing people how to use their own voice, how to use their own ideas and express those ideas. But what has happened is Brave New Voices on HBO, Louder Than a Bomb, the documentary, and a lot of other things had, and YouTube, and even the wave of poets through the early 2000s, early 2010s being on YouTube and showing the kids this art and craft have we've kind of put these tools in their hands. We're the independent artists. We are the punk rock. We are the underground hip hop. We are a self-contained, not self-contained, but a very insular community, and that's been a not very good thing for things like mentorship. Um, so you kind of have to. What we have not learned is to take the good with the bad, is because we say that it's a culture, but it's really a subculture. Because if it's a culture, then we're doing the things to renew it and regenerate it generationally. Um, and a lot of us are still trying to do that, but unfortunately, just beginning with the art itself, yeah, a lot of it can become and has become very homogenized. The flip side of it is that it still exposes a lot of people to a lot of different things.
yeah. I'm not. I it's more like stylistically. I mean, the content, is the content, and it'll be what it'll be. But I'm saying like stylistically. I remember when I was in it, it seemed like there were some tropes, and there were some kind of things, there were patterns, and there were similarities, and there was kind of things that typically worked and things that would go further. And that existed, but it seemed like get further and further down the line. And then when I watched something like Slam, the old
Hmm.
documentary with the
Hmm.
or Slam Nation or Slam
Hmm.
something, what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. With Paul Williams and when they follow the team with Bosia and Mums, and just Care Um,
Yep.
there was such
Slam
a great
Nation.
variation. There was such a great variation between what people were doing. You know what I mean? Like Taylor Molly versus, I don't know. When you can watch the outtakes at the end. They were doing like this weird thing about like an industrial center. I can't remember who it was, but it was like people were very different from one another, like very very
Yeah.
different. And I just feel like that differentiation is kind of like, I don't know. It doesn't feel like it was what it once was, and I kind of feel like that has to do with the technology of videos going viral. I think that's the way to be.
Very much so. You can look and see who does the best and who scores the best and what works. I don't know. I mean, I've stuck with it as a competitor and as a mentor and coach because the one thing that I've learned that I get the most from is constantly consistently doing something different, plugging something different into what's expected in certain avenues and certain venues. That's why the funny thing is everybody talks about Chicago as the home of slam. Chicago has very rarely, since the early days, placed high, won, or that kind of thing. They call me a slam legend. I cut a figure as a slam legend without ever stepping on a national final stage. I've won regionals a bunch of times. I've got to semifinals at nationals a bunch of times. I've coached teams to semifinals, but I've never been on a national final stage in 25 years of slam. Never been on a national final stage.
Yeah.
But I've always, even if I'm going to play the game, I've always refused to do what everybody else is doing. And those are the teams that I've been on for 15, 16 years. We've always encouraged each other and always coached ourselves to not write, to not perform exactly what the other people do. Even if we like it,
Yeah, yeah,
great, do different. But we've always been remembered and we're always talked about. Chicago teams are always remembered and talked about, whether we get to semifinals or finals or not. And that's always been the best part about being a part of that national scene.
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't want to come off like as a hater, so let's.
No, I mean it is what it is.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so let's talk about your first public your book you got published.
Yes.
Here are my notes.
That is Conscience Under Pressure.
Conscious Under Pressure, and then after that we'll get to the way of the B boy. But first, Conscious Under Pressure. Tell us about the publication of that book and how that came about.
In 2004, I had actually just made my first slam team, but I had also I'd done a local film. I had done some, like, a lot of local performances with hip hop artists and touring traveling performers coming through. Um, DJ Spinna, Jesse De La Pena, Juice, um, a few other performers, like people who escaped me. But I was in a locally produced film called Urban Poet as a slam poet. Imagine that. um, but also had, like, been actively competing. In 2004, I had made the Mental Graffiti Slam team and competed at Nats in St. Louis, and was compiling the first few years of me really doing being a performer into what became Conscience Under Pressure, a local press, Puddinhead Press. Dave Getchick, who runs Puddinhead, he had started a side project with CJ Lady and uh, um, uh, William Allen Jones, and they formed another press which they were putting together strictly to put out hosts of local shows. I had joined the Polyrhythmic Arts Collective, and I was also co-host part-time at Mental Graffiti. So they grabbed me, put out a chapbook, slapped an ISBN on it under the banner Fractal Edge Press. It was a consignment deal, but it got marketed through their website, and so anytime I didn't have copies, I could either get bundles of copies or just refer people to the website. So it was decent distribution and pretty easy to be found when I was touring, and I was touring very regularly at the time.
Yeah. Can you talk about the importance of small presses there to the slam scene, the spoken word scene broadly there in Chicago?
Um, because I came to poetry and writing and publishing as a performer and as a performer outside of the genre, I never recognized how important they were because, quite honestly, I had been in it and started to take it seriously only for a few years before um, Wayne Allen Jones and CJ and Dave had asked me if I wanted to put this book out. What I had learned is that not only was it important to have the opportunity to have somebody come and put out um, you know 10 to 15 pieces of your work, but to actually have it distributed, because so many people end up doing self-publication and the like. I learned more about the small presses and micro presses of Chicago um, as I delved deeper into the scene. It actually boomeranged back, learning who got out of the city with their stuff as I tried to get my own stuff distributed out of the city. So for one, have been a bad student of it, but definitely a recipient, but a bad student of it. But I could definitely speak on the importance of it because uh, me coming into performance poetry and writing, I came into it in my early 30s, and it was later than a lot of people who were starting to come up around me already, and I came into it without a degree. So to come in doing not a lot of upfront political stuff, but like some under the radar political, but definitely within an art and craft that was not being expressed in the genre, was definitely different and something that people were grabbing a hold of, maybe more than they were other people at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Tell us about the way of the b boy.
The way of the b-boy, I had started compiling pieces for it in about 2009, 2010, with the idea of getting another book published, but also in the tradition of underground art and hip hop, having a piece that was copyright, trademark, lock, stock, my own. Um, and to not just be a collection of poems, but a theme built around what I had used as a mentor at the time through Young Chicago Authors, through Louder Than a Bomb, and forming the Chicago Four Star Poets, which we did workshops, writing and performance workshops, but using hip hop as a vehicle for uh, expressing ideas, using the culture and the background and showing history that everyone has an origin story, everyone has a place where they come from and a story to tell, and in many cases, oral tradition, ancestral tradition, and you could use it through this new less than 50-year-old culture called hip hop. And so I spent 2 or 3 years writing, every year at uh, National Poetry Writers Month, every year doing during what um, became known as Hip Hop History Month in November. Poems, meditations, but also building a curriculum sketch about how I discovered not just rap music or you know you know uh a new popular urban black music, but the culture that was built around it, not just New York City or the East Coast, but how it affected youth across America, in particular me being from the South Side of Chicago. So I collected these poems and built a curriculum sketch built on how I kind of discovered the art, and how I discovered that the art was really rooted in culture, and how it can also be used in similar fashion as a social studies or English curriculum, or even a theater curriculum. But I called it Way of the B-Boy, and I decided that I wanted to own it myself. So I completely self-published, and I still print copies of it, and I've made sure that it's not something that was built on the times or the trends of hip hop at any given time. The so-called golden era when I was a kid, or the '90s, underground rebirth, or even it's not any kind of nostalgia trip. And so I felt it was timeless, and that I would always be able to own it myself. And so I kept it myself, and so I've distributed it myself instead of going through any other press.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you share with us another poem?
Yeah. Um, I actually I'll do one from Way of the B-Boy. I had a series of poems called the Graffiti Monologues, of course named after the famous vagina monologues, just as a takeoff recognition point. Um but I wrote this just about 10 years ago. Uh Allergies, excuse me. Um, but it speaks to being a veteran of really any art form besides graph, going from the train yards to the galleries and back. To the rookie at the Wall of Fame. They tell us we don't own these streets and tunnels. Not like we've ever had much of anything to start with. Even with titanic talent, we are labeled vandal, misfit, sociopath. I let my name take ownership. Made my name a panoramic that melted the frame, turned 3D trains into sculpture with characters that followed passengers on and off, sketches that leaped from sketchbooks, turning them into mixtape, encyclopedia, scrolls traded amongst monks, style transmitted across town and over borders. These window etchers, they wouldn't know Etch a Sketch from Escher. I heard your neighbor whooped your ass, not for the graffiti on his garage, but because that shit sucked. Now you want to play with the big kids. Audacity's a given. You got a wreck shop like Christmas Eve. The only thing hot about your technique is stolen paint here. Take this sidewalk chalk, get the fuck out my face. Battling shouldn't be on the agenda until you check the syllabus. History. Humans have obsessed over leaving their mark since cave paintings. It's how we discovered immortality. Geometry. Assessing your target on approach determines your originality and efficiency. Phys ed. You have no stories to tell if you're getting jumped and robbed of your gear. Civics. You are criminalized until you make money for society. Philosophy. You gotta exist for this shit beyond ego. Most of us are just painting for the choir. You got to step outside the sanctuary of self and take up a cause. I bombed Mandela when apartheid's architects weren't trying to hear freedom. I tagged MLK as a deserved cry for a holiday. It's why we paint memorial walls. It's why I climb rusted fire escapes out onto the ledge of my own id, practicing letters to arthritic perfection and massage the tension from my neck from craning upwards or twisting ankles chasing some fucker like you caught going over my shit with dripping amateurism. Chasing fame only got me chased by the vandal squads. Heat from youngins like you only brings assault charges. All I wanted was to rewrite Urban Blight. You make your name for namesake, but your shit is a field trip and my method is Timothy Leary. I leave a trail of traces and paint fumes, fractals breaking midnight to high noon, addictive vision that feeling fingertips are useless unless depressing fat caps. So wait your turn. Salute veteran days. We rule the lines one car at a time, one rooftop at a time, for hours at a time. So until you're ready to stop fighting style wars and document yourself, until you're ready to attack walls like they spit on your mother, until your fingertips bleed spray paint, fuck tagging, kid. Show me that you can write.
Yeah, that's good. You use a lot of humor in your work. I heard your neighbor beat your ass. That's funny.
Yeah.
I mean, I really like that how you punctuate. Like it's kind of these lines is poetic and it's very like rhythmic and it's, it's recognizable registers. And then all of a sudden, I know where like there's like this little piece of conversation that breaks in. It's really funny.
Thank you.
So okay, so we've covered time. Your experience in slam. Talked about your books. Now, what I'm really interested in, this part I've really been interested in. I've been saving it. Your adventures as a spoken word recording artist. Now, what basements has this taken to you? What studios where has these adventures taken you?
Um, a young engineer and producer and songwriter named Masaki Araya. Masaki is right here from Chicago. I know him from working when I worked at Tower Records for many years. Masaki was a student at Harold Washington College, part of the City College system, and he had studio access. And so I got a chance to do a lot of free recording. That was where I did a lot of the stuff that ended up on I don't even know the link, but I have a random SoundCloud page. But it ended up on the EP Turnstiles, and then also ended up as pre-production and on some other projects. Masaki has an EP called ME, which you may still find on Spotify, SoundCloud, or YouTube. I had a piece called Marvel Girls, a hip hop related poem, and actually I ended up with two poems on his EP. Now those recorded for free at Harold Washington College right in downtown Chicago. Um, a lot of other things I had done, I ended up doing DJ Risky Business. Risky, he is part of the crew that is doing Midway, the Chicago hip hop documentary. Risky is a longtime recording partner of mine. I had recorded in Risky's bedroom in Chicago Heights. Risky's been like the road DJ for Juice, for Prime back before when he was doing the Blaze battle and stuff like that. A lot of different like typical cats, the guys, touring back in like the late 90s around the Midwest, with a lot of those different artists. Jeff Baraka, O Type Star, um, uh, Riot One from Sound Scandal Music, a lot of like Chicago local cats. DJ Jesse De La Pena, who he was well known as part of being a part of the Grammy winning uh, acid jazz ensemble Liquid Soul. So it was a lot of places that, again, it's bedrooms and basements, it's self-sustaining artists. My guy DJ Motion, Bruce Tate, DJ Colette, DJ Mozzie, it was like all these different dance-based artists, and I got a chance to do a lot of stuff with them back in the mid '90s. Live PAs, so the recordings were the shows themselves, and they might have ended up on a double reel mix that were on a radio broadcast somewhere. So it's a lot of very, s- just underground. Oh, here I ended up recording this kind of thing, and in some cases, when it was projects that they were planned. By the time I got a chance to do that, I was fortunate enough, like Jesse De La Pena, who I'd done things with DJ Spinna and got introduced to um, Large Professor and a few other artists by way of um, I was doing things in his home studio. But I think my most quality work was done because a buddy of mine was an intern at Harold Washington College, which, I mean, that's a DIY dream right
Yeah, yeah,
there.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's been a tale of interconnected DIY dreams. It's been pretty,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
it's
that's
rewarding though.
I had mentioned I had a piece on like somewhere on a hard drive in at Jay Rawls's house. Masaki and I recorded that at Harold Washington College and then
Mm,
emailed it to him, and then we got the final track, without the full mix down back. And I've heard it back, and he
yeah,
loved what I did with it, and I love what he did with the final production for it. But all that got done on bounce back and forth between a couple of home computers and a nice uh, community college recording studio.
yeah, yeah. Well, for the audience's benefit, for my benefit, I mean, does Harold Washington have a pretty good recording studio?
It's not bad. In my limited experience, I've seen a couple of the small label studios in Chicago and the old Island Record Studio, which was more rehearsal space, but it did have recording facilities. And it very much stood up, and the quality of the recordings was great. Like I had sent that EP out to a lot of different places, and people played it, broadcasted a lot of different, radio, internet, and broadcast radio. So I was very happy with the quality of it. I was very fortunate to be able to do that.
I think I spoke at Harold Washington in like 2000, I want to say 12,
Hmm.
2013 maybe, and it was like hard to get in. There was like it was really walls and if you weren't supposed to be there, it seems like it'd be hard to get in. I mean, were you able to sneak in, or were they to get you in, or did they not have those security barriers back then, or
He, he was there and he was working, so it was as if I was a student or a professor. And the best part is, we're talking what, about 10 years or so ago. I
yeah,
wasn't as gray as I am now, but I was gray enough so I looked like I had business there. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? I
yeah, yeah.
looked like I was working.
Yeah.
So, and I
Well,
think there was a couple times
I
that I got
mean,
asked for ID, but I got buzzed in.
yeah, yeah. No, it's real kind of draconian getting in there, but it's a good school. It's a good school. Important. So so how you holding up? I mean, how you holding up in this staying orders and whatnot?
It's different. Um, it's different when, especially the last 7 years of my life, have been very focused on. I've been fortunate to focus on writing and somewhat on career. I was able to refocus on career in maybe the last 3 or 4 years, to have it interrupted not only as a writer performer but as a teaching artist, because I am also working in classrooms now. Um, that's been definitely not welcome. Just in the momentum of learning as a excuse me, as being a professional contract worker in that field.
Yeah.
But also I am a parent. I'm a family guy. I'm a parent and a husband, and so having to go from being a teaching artist and an assistant for grade schoolers to having your own grade schooler at home and just trying to keep everybody happy and healthy and sane. Um, it's a bit much, but we also have a good support system around us. I'm from Chicago. My immediate family lives here. My wife's immediate family doesn't, but we've got a lot of close friends nearby. So if things go, really, the wrong way, real sudden, uh, I think we've got enough backup. Um, I live in one of the less wild areas of the city, and is as overblown as crime in the city, in any big city, is anywhere in America, but as overblown as it is in Chicago. We do have our moments, but it's really odd and different how those moments are now overshadowed by a much more universal set of problems. And I'm having an interesting
But
time trying to get a grasp on what that really means besides just my day-to-day functioning, which my day-to-day functioning is wake up, clean the house, do homeschooling, remote schooling with my kid, get some free time, try to hang out, keep my mind off stuff, keep my mind on stuff to see what's happening. But, you know, I have a lot less personal anxiety, but a lot more existential anxiety.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So have you been doing a lot of these like Zoom performances or like the little poetry showcases and stuff?
I have. I started out, uh, the whole Writers Month. I started a little bit earlier because I wanted to document feelings and ideas. So right when Chicago and Illinois started to shut down in the middle of March, but then I did a few of my own performances, uh, just to like get the 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 pocket change tip jar ringing, to keep a few extra things in the house and stuff like that. Now, do things like go buy masks with your extra money and shit like that. But yeah, actually contributing to a couple of anthologies by writing, but also doing a few live performances. Um, because as a live performer, one of the things that I wanted to do this year was get a book done and actually through a full publisher, but also get back out and do some more live performances. I had a few feelers out that, of course, those got put aside. I had some gigs that were canceled. So, of course, I did like a few other poets did, and I went on tour around my house, in my front yard, in my backyard, and neighborhood. And that's
Yeah.
kind of cathartic, doing some new stuff and just kind of keeping my whole my whole stage horror mentality active, but also make him keep, again, it does kind of keep the mind off of you know the doom and gloom that is being presented on a daily basis.
Have you like do you find it weird to like perform into a phone, like looking at yourself and seeing your own image? Is that odd to you?
um I have, being one of those people that's taking advantage of the whole technology, you can put yourself out there thing. I had recorded myself on a couple occasions as a performer in the past. Like even on my YouTube page, I have several performances that I've set up in either my backyard or my living room or out in public for certain events that were built just for that kind of thing. So I've kind of gotten used to it. It's still an oddity. It's still an oddity right now just to kind of, you know, adjust in one particular room in my house where this light is very, very weird. So yeah, it is odd. Um, Especially when you find yourself going for long. Like it's one thing to sit in a room for a short project and record something for 2 minutes, three, four, 5 minutes. It's another thing, admittedly, to sit in front of a camera for a half an hour to 45 minutes just straight performing stuff. But then there's 15 people watching, there's 30 people watching, there's 50 people watching. So you do it because you got friends and friends of friends who they need stuff to do too, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like for me, like like being on the it's like being a little bit of like being on the radio or something like that. Like you can't see the audience, can't really whatever. That's one thing, but to see my own face,
Yeah,
that's fucking weird. So I started doing this thing. I said, you know what? I figure, I always want to emphasize what's good about the internet, not what's like whack about it. Like so, like what's whack is like having like an open mic that's like the same people you'd see anyways. But now they're all
yeah,
online, and then you want to hug
yeah,
them and you feel that. What's cool about it is to like do what we're doing right now, right? So like I don't have to fly to Chicago to talk to you. You don't have to fly to LA to talk to me. This is cool, right? Okay,
right.
this is what's cool about the internet. So I want to emphasize that. But then the performances, I'm like, well, what's cool about the internet versus being there in person? So I started going like this and like doing like the Blair Cedillo project, right? Like like turn into my own like independent
Right.
film director, move the camera around. Shit. So I don't know. I mean, most people do stuff with their back with the backdrop. That's what they do, but not me. I'm not, I start moving thing around and trying to do something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I find there's a spot in my living room that I've set up and I've done a lot of things behind. It's a bunch of CDs and some stuff on the wall. It's clean, it's there. I've never really gone out of my way, but I'm like, okay, this is a cool spot, you
Yeah,
know. But I've grabbed the camera and gone out. There's an annual event the last Sunday of every April called the Poetry Bomb.
yeah,
One of my friends in Chicago is a co-organizer, and the idea is to go out and do poetry in public places. Well, I've done it everywhere from across the street from Wrigley Field during a game to my homegirl in Santa Cruz's backyard when I was out in California on tour. And in some cases, instead of just being in an ordinary public place, I would go in a public place, but be in a very odd place. Like, for example, I did the graffiti monologues and I went and did it with a train yard or like an active train line in the background, but there was all of these different walls that were in that area. So I had them as the backdrop. I had moving trains as the backdrop, and it worked out really, really cool. So I kind of got used to kind of seeing these dynamics and like seeing how bad the glare is on my dirty glasses, or the how the light reflects off the back wall. So you kind of
yeah,
get used to stuff like that.
yeah, yeah. No, the thing I haven't got used to, and I just decided that I'm gonna have to migrate my male pattern vanity elsewhere. Is I cannot get the lighting right here. So like if I had a COVID name, it'd be Casper. I look like I look like those pictures that Cholas took in the '90s at the mall, glowing and shit. I'm like, what the fuck? Like so you know what? The guests are interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So leave it at that. Oh man. Well, Billy, I really, really appreciate you spending this hour with us. Is there advice you can give to us, and also somewhere where we can find your work?
Um, the best place to find me right now is by way of Facebook or Instagram. Look up the Backpack Files. I post video, I post text, I post things that inspire me, I post things that make me laugh. All kinds of different stuff on both those mediums, but especially Facebook, mainly because I'm a rebel and I want to break the algorithm. There's 1,000 people allegedly paying attention to me and 25 of them looking at any given time. So Backpack Files. One thing I am doing this month, actually in the coming week, is relaunching a blog that I have called Sanctuary 360. It is on WordPress. But there is also the YouTube page for video, stuff like that. But the WordPress blog, the Instagram and Facebook pages, and every now and then new video popping up on YouTube are probably the best places to find random blatherings and new material and microblogs and all that kind of stuff.
All right, all right. And what advice do you have for anybody? Let's say, you know, what advice do you have for failed musicians to get into spoken word poetry?
Um, do all of that different shit you do. Go find go now that all these videos exist of slam and performance poets and spoken word artists. Go look at all of them and then find everything that you don't do. Find everything they don't do and do that stylistically, artistically, mind, body, and soul. It's what I did when I came in, even though I was inspired by some artists that were hip hop adjacent. They weren't speaking of the culture in the same way that I was. So I found different ways to do it. I interjected myself into slam where there were not necessarily a lot of black performers, and I became basically the foremost slam related performer in my city. But I did that by doing different. I became known in slam because I did not do what other people do. So just always come different and encourage encourage the older generation to stick with it and to keep speaking and continue to mine um the energy of younger and upcoming and newer writer performers thinkers.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Billy, for your time, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Thank you for having me, Matt. Appreciate it. Take care of yourself.
All right, cool.